The money left quietly. That's the part nobody tells you about. You expect betrayal to announce itself. You expect a scene, a confrontation, a moment where everything shifts, and you know. But the money just left. A little at a time. From the account I'd been building since before we were married, since before I ever met my husband, since the years I was pulling double shifts at the hospital and eating cereal for dinner because I was determined to own something that was mine. I'm a pharmacist. Have been for 11 years. I work at a hospital, not a chain, not a drugstore counter, but a trauma center where things move fast, and the margin for error is exactly 0. I like that. I like knowing that precision matters, that attention to detail is not a personality flaw but a professional requirement. My husband, his name is Warren, used to say that was my problem. You track everything, Lee. You can't just let things be. He'd laugh when he said it, like it was a quirk. Like my caretaking of our finances was something between endearing and exhausting. He'd been saying it for 9 years. I didn't realize until much later that he'd been counting on it. We met when I was 28. He was 31. He was finishing a construction project management certification and working for a mid-size firm downtown. He was steady, he was warm, and when he laughed, it filled the room in a way that made you feel like you were in the right place. I loved that about him. I loved that I never had to wonder what he was feeling because he wore it plainly. Or I thought he did. We got married after 3 years of dating. Bought a house in a suburb outside of Indianapolis. 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, a backyard with a deck he built himself over one long summer. My mother cried at the wedding. His mother, Diane, pulled me aside at the reception and said, "You're the best thing that ever happened to him. Don't let him forget it." I laughed. I thought she was being sweet. I wonder sometimes if she knew something I didn't. We don't have kids. We talked about it for years and never quite landed. I thought there was still time. I was 36 when everything happened. Time starts to mean something different at 36 than it did at 28. The first conference was 4 years into our marriage. Warren's firm started sending him to a project management summit every September. 3 nights, 4 days, somewhere different each year. Nashville, then Denver, then Charlotte, then back to Nashville. He always came home relaxed in a way he wasn't when he left. Tan sometimes, depending on where they held the outdoor sessions. A little distant for a day or two and then back to himself. I didn't think anything of it. He brought me back things. A candle from a boutique in Nashville. A jar of honey from a farmer's market in Denver. Small, thoughtful things. The kind of things you bring someone you're thinking about while you're away. I keep thinking about those gifts now. I think about the fact that he stopped at a market and chose something specific for me while he was with her. I think about what that means about a person. I still haven't figured out what it means. The conferences went on for 3 years before I noticed anything. And here is the embarrassing part. The part I have to say out loud even though it makes me feel foolish. I didn't notice because of some brilliant instinct or a telltale change in behavior. I noticed because of a number. In the fall of our 7th year of marriage, I sat down to update our household spreadsheet. I do this every quarter, a habit from my early 20s when I was managing student loans, and I never shook it, and the balance in our joint savings account was $4,200 lower than it should have been. I thought I'd made an error. I checked the math 3 times. The math was right. I pulled up the account history online and sat there for a long time reading transfer records. Small withdrawals, mostly. 200 here, 350 there. A few that were larger, one for $800, one for $100, spaced out over 14 months in a way that would have been almost invisible if you weren't paying attention. Warren handled a separate account for his business expenses. I'd never had full visibility into that one. It was his work account, he said, and I'd trusted that. We had our joint account, we had our individual accounts, and we had his business account. That was the system. I looked at the transfer records again. The money was moving from our joint savings into an account I didn't recognize. I wrote the routing number down on a piece of paper and folded it and put it in my work bag. I didn't say anything to Warren that night. We ate dinner. He asked about my day. I told him about a patient interaction that had frustrated me, and he listened, and I watched his face while he listened, and I felt something move through me that I didn't have a name for yet. Not quite suspicion, not quite knowing. Something between the two. A stillness that settles in when your body has already arrived at a conclusion your mind isn't ready to accept. I want to be honest about what I did next, because I think people expect the wronged spouse to either confront immediately or fall apart, and I did neither. I went to work the next morning. I filled prescriptions. I checked interactions and reviewed charts and answered questions from the floor nurses, and I was completely professionally present. And underneath all of it, I was thinking about that account number. My cousin Mara works in banking. Not the same bank we use, but close enough that she understands the landscape. I texted her that evening and asked if she had 20 minutes. She called me back in 10. I asked her carefully what it would mean if money was being transferred from a joint account into an account that only had one name on it. She got quiet for a moment. "How much money?" she said. I told her. Another quiet moment. Then, "Lay, are you okay?" "I don't know yet," I said. "I need to understand what I'm looking at before I decide how I feel about it." She walked me through it. The account I'd found, based on the routing information and the pattern of transfers, was almost certainly a personal savings account opened in Warren's name only. He would have been able to open it without my knowledge. The transfers were small enough that they wouldn't have triggered any alerts. And because I wasn't the one monitoring our joint savings on a monthly basis, I wouldn't have seen the pattern building. 14 months of transfers. 14 months. Mara asked if I wanted her to connect me with someone at her branch who handled financial consulting for clients in complicated situations. She said it carefully. I appreciated the carefulness. I said yes. Then I said, "Don't tell anyone yet." She said, "Of course not." That was a Thursday in November. I didn't touch Warren's phone. I want to be clear about that, not because I think there's anything morally wrong with looking at a phone in that situation, but because I didn't need to. I'd worked in healthcare long enough to know that the most important thing you can do when you suspect a problem is document what you actually know, not go looking for things that might be harder to quantify. What I knew, money was being redirected. What I didn't know yet, where and why and who. I started paying attention differently. Not with panic. Panic makes you sloppy. But with the kind of focused observation you use when you're trying to catch a medication error before it becomes a patient harm event. You slow down. You look at what's actually in front of you, not what you expect to see. Warren's September conference was 8 months away. I had time. What I noticed over those months, he'd started going to the gym more regularly. Not excessively, not in a way that would have been a red flag on its own, but there was a new deliberateness to it. He bought new shoes without mentioning it. He started wearing a different cologne. Not dramatically different, but I noticed. He was slightly more attentive, more thoughtful about small gestures, the kind of attentiveness that reads as guilt if you're paying attention, and reads as affection if you're not. He texted more. I didn't read the messages, but I saw the phone face down more often than it used to be. None of these things would have meant anything on their own. I knew that. But added together and against the background of the money, they meant something. In March, I met with the financial consultant Mara had referred me to. His name was Arthur, and he was kind and direct in equal measure. I brought my documentation. He looked at the transfer history I'd compiled and told me that based on the pattern, the secondary account was likely being used for discretionary personal spending. He said that in situations like mine, it was not uncommon for a spouse to have opened a secondary account to manage spending they didn't want visible to their partner. I asked him what my options were if this turned out to be part of a larger financial situation. He told me. Clearly. For 45 minutes. I went home and made dinner, and Warren asked how my day was, and I told him it was fine. I almost didn't follow him to the conference. I want to say that, because I think there's a version of this story where the decision to follow your husband feels obvious, feels like of course you do that, what else would you do? But it didn't feel obvious, it felt like a line. Once you follow someone, you can't unknow what you find, and there's a specific grief that comes with that. Not just the grief of the betrayal itself, but the grief of having been the person who had to go looking. Of having traded your own innocence for the truth. I thought about it for a long time. I was sitting on the edge of the bathtub in our master bathroom one night in early August, and Warren was downstairs watching something on TV, and I could hear the low sound of it through the floor, and I made the decision not to catch him, not to make a scene, to know. Because I had been living with not knowing for almost a year, and the not knowing was eating me from the inside, and I was tired of feeling crazy in my own house. He left on a Thursday morning. The conference, he said, was in Atlanta this year. He'd sent me a screenshot of the hotel reservation months ago, when I'd asked for it, casual and immediate in a way that told me he'd expected the question. The hotel was real. I looked it up. It existed. A conference center attached to a mid-rise near the airport. I booked my own room. Different hotel, 2 blocks away. I requested the time off work 3 weeks in advance and told my supervisor I had a personal matter. She didn't ask. I drove to the airport alone. I didn't tell anyone except Mara, and even her I only told the day before. "Be safe," she said. "Call me if you need me." I said I would. Atlanta in September is still warm. I'd forgotten that. I remember stepping off the plane and feeling the heat and thinking about how many times Warren had come home from this trip tanned, and I'd assumed it was from outdoor conference sessions, and I hadn't thought twice about it. I checked into my hotel, changed my clothes, and sat down on the edge of the bed. I gave myself 30 minutes to feel whatever I needed to feel. I sat there and I breathed and I let myself be afraid for exactly 30 minutes. Then I stood up, put on my shoes, and went outside. The conference hotel was easy to find. There was a registration table visible through the lobby glass, and I could see name badges and rolling luggage and the specific exhaustion of people in professional development settings. Warren was somewhere in there. I didn't go in. I found a cafe across the street with a window seat and ordered something I didn't drink, and I watched the entrance. He came out at 6:47 in the evening, with 3 other people. 2 men, 1 woman. They were laughing. Warren had his jacket off and his collar open, and he looked relaxed in a way he rarely looked at home anymore. Not unhappy at home, but relaxed in a different way, a lighter way, like something had been set down. They walked to a restaurant 2 blocks north. I followed at a distance. I'm not a person who follows people. I'm a pharmacist from Indianapolis who tracks spreadsheets and checks drug interactions. The whole thing felt surreal, like watching myself from above. I stood outside the restaurant for a moment, then went in. It was busy enough that I could get a table near the back without being obvious. I ordered something. I kept my head angled slightly away and I watched. The woman at the table was maybe 40. Dark hair, tailored blazer, the easy posture of someone used to being looked at. She was sitting directly across from Warren, and twice during the time I was there, she reached across the table and touched his hand. Not dramatically, just touched his hand, the way you touch someone you're comfortable with, the way you touch someone you know. Warren touched her back. I took one photo. Just one. Then I put my phone in my bag and finished my water and paid my check and left. I sat on a bench outside for a long time. The air smelled like exhaust and fried food, and someone nearby was playing music from a phone without headphones. A completely ordinary evening in a city where nobody knew me. I thought, so there it is. I didn't cry. Not then. What I felt was something quieter than crying, something like grief with all the air taken out of it. I flew home the next morning. I didn't tell Warren I'd gone. I didn't tell him when he came home 4 days later with a small jar of Atlanta hot sauce and a hug that lasted 2 seconds longer than usual. I said thank you. I put the hot sauce in the cabinet. I called an attorney named Patricia on the following Monday. A friend from my gym, Cassandra, had used her during her own divorce 2 years prior and had mentioned her name in the context of she doesn't let them get away with anything. I wrote that name down at the time without knowing why. Patricia was direct. She reviewed the financial documentation I'd compiled over the past 11 months. She looked at the photo. She asked about our joint assets, our individual assets, the house, my retirement accounts, his business accounts. She asked if there were any shared business interests. I said no, she said. You've done good work. Most people come in here with nothing. You have something. I asked her what something got me. She explained what I was likely entitled to. Equitable distribution in Indiana, which meant the court would look at everything, the duration of the marriage, the financial contributions of each party, the fact that money had been transferred out of a joint account without my knowledge or consent over a 14-month period. That last part, she said, is significant. I told her I needed a few more weeks. She said, take the time you need, but don't wait so long that things change. I want to say something about the few weeks I gave myself. They were not weeks of hoping it wasn't true. I already knew it was true. They were not weeks of considering forgiveness, not because I'm a hard person, but because I had spent 11 months grieving this while it was still invisible. And by the time I walked into Patricia's office, I had already mourned the marriage I thought I had. The weeks were something else. They were about making sure I was doing the right thing in the right order, that every T was crossed, that I wasn't moving out of panic or anger, but out of clarity. Warren didn't know any of this. We had dinners. We watched TV. He asked about my patients, never by name, just in the general way of spouses checking in. I asked about his projects. We were civil and familiar, and I understood, in a way I found surprising, how long a person could live inside a performance they didn't choose. He'd been doing it for 4 years, probably longer. I could do it for 3 more weeks. I chose a Sunday. Not randomly, I thought about it. Sunday because it was his mother Diane's regular dinner at our house, the first Sunday of each month, a tradition we'd maintained since we moved in. And I called my Aunt Rochelle the week before and asked her if she could come to dinner that Sunday, and when she asked why, I told her I needed someone in my corner for something, and she said, I'll be there by 5. She was the first person I told everything to. I sat across from her at her kitchen table on a Wednesday afternoon, and I went through all of it, from the spreadsheet to Atlanta to Patricia's office, and she listened without interrupting, which is not something Aunt Rochelle is known for, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Does he know you know? She said. No. She nodded. Good. Keep it that way until Sunday. The Sunday dinner started normally. Diane brought a sweet potato casserole, which she does every time regardless of the occasion. Aunt Rochelle arrived at 5:15 with wine she didn't open, and she and Diane sat in the living room and talked about a TV show they both watched. And Warren was in the kitchen finishing the chicken he'd marinated the night before, moving around in the easy, comfortable way of a man who doesn't know what's coming. I set the table. 5 plates. He looked at me quizzically when he came in, and I said, "Rochelle's joining us," and he smiled and said, "Oh, great," and went back to the kitchen. We ate. The food was good. The conversation moved through the usual channels. Diane's neighbor's ongoing fence dispute, a road project that was affecting the commute on Warren's side of downtown, a TV show everyone had opinions about. Normal. Ordinary. A Sunday. After dinner, Diane got up to help clear dishes, and I said, "Actually, can everyone stay for a few minutes? There's something I need to talk about." Warren looked at me from across the table. Something crossed his face, not guilt yet, just alertness. A slight recalibration, the way you look at someone when you suddenly can't read the room. I had the folder on the chair beside me. I'd put it there before they arrived. I opened it. I set the account transfer records on the table, highlighted in yellow where I'd marked the relevant dates and amounts. I set the photo beside it, printed, not on a screen, because Patricia had advised me to have physical copies of everything. "I know about the account," I said. "I know where the money was going, and I know about Atlanta." The room went very quiet. Warren looked at the documents. He looked at the photo. Then he looked at me, and for a moment his face was completely open in a way I hadn't seen in years, raw, surprised. Without the pleasant neutrality he'd been wearing. He said my name, Lee, just that. Diane said, "Warren." Her voice was different than I'd ever heard it, flat and very still. Aunt Rochelle didn't say anything. She reached under the table and put her hand on my knee for just a moment, then withdrew it. Warren started to speak. He said something about the account, that it wasn't what it looked like, and then he stopped, because I think he could see in my face that I was not here for that version of the conversation. "I'm not asking you to explain," I said. "I'm telling you what I know, and I'm telling you that I've already spoken to an attorney, and that this conversation is the beginning of a process, not an argument." He looked at the photo again. He looked like a man calculating whether there was still a version of this he could manage. There wasn't. Diane stood up from the table, picked up her sweet potato dish, and said, "I'm going to give you two some time." Then she paused. She looked at me with an expression I won't be able to describe well, because I don't know all the things that were in it. Something like apology. Something like respect. She put her hand briefly on my shoulder as she passed. Warren watched her leave the room. Then he looked at me and said, "How long have you known?" I said, "Long enough." He covered his face with his hands. He sat there for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Lee. I am so sorry." And I understood then. The strange thing about hearing what you've been waiting to hear is that it doesn't do what you think it will. It doesn't crack something open. There's no relief, exactly. Just a kind of settling. The weight you've been carrying for almost a year redistributes itself into something more permanent. Something you'll carry differently from now on, but carry nonetheless. I said, "I know." Aunt Rochelle stood up quietly and began to clear the dishes. I heard her running water in the kitchen, and I was so grateful for it, for the ordinary sound of it, for her presence without pressure. Warren and I talked for another hour. I won't share all of it. Some of it was his confession, his explanation, details I don't feel the need to relay. Some of it was mine, the things I needed him to understand about what this had cost. Not just the money, the years, the energy I'd given to a version of this marriage that wasn't real. He didn't try to save it, I think to his credit. And this is the only credit I have to give him. He understood that saving it wasn't available to him. The divorce took 7 months. It was not pleasant, but it was manageable. Patricia was, as Cassandra had said, not the type to let things slide. The secondary account was flagged as marital waste. The transfers were documented and presented. Warren's attorney pushed back on the framing but didn't push too hard, because the paper trail was clear. The house was sold. I moved into an apartment closer to the hospital that I lease in my name only, and I have a small second bedroom I'm not sure what to do with yet, and a kitchen that gets good morning light. I was 37 when the divorce was finalized. I am 38 now. People ask how I'm doing, and I tell them honestly that I'm fine, which is the kind of answer that sounds like deflection, but isn't. I'm genuinely fine. Not in the numbed-out way, not in the performing okayness way. Fine in the way of having survived something and come out the other side with your sense of yourself intact. Fine in the way of knowing what you are actually made of. I still track my finances every quarter. I still open the spreadsheet and go line by line. I still catch things that don't add up. The difference is that now there's only one name on the accounts, and the math always comes out the way I expect it to. And when it doesn't, I'll know what to do.